We actually start seeing the sanctions kicking in properly, we should expect that to take, normally several weeks.
And is the onus on the individual companies or the countries from where those companies operate?
Well, I think a lot of companies now are, of course they're global, but they're also right now, for reputational reasons, probably trying to scale down the business with Libya. But to be honest, what we have seen over the last week was a very quick drop in Libyan crude. Looking at it weekly, yes, 600,000 barrels a day might still be a kind of weekly average for last week. But if we look at the production which likely left Libya yesterday, it is likely to have been a very minuscule number and probably much smaller today. So the question is, maybe we should expect Libya to be pretty much shut down when it comes to early next week.
Some of the oil is still flowing, but how badly has Libya's wealth as a whole been affected, first of all, by what is going on within the country, and secondly, by the sanctions themselves that are being imposed?
Well, I mean,
when do they bite?
Well, the sanctions will bite. Gradually, they have probably started biting. They will definitely start biting in the coming weeks. That is normally what happens with sanctions. There is a certain lag to it. But, when it comes to, Libya earns something like 95% of its export revenue, maybe even more from oil and gas taken together, with pretty much all of that starting to stop gradually and maybe pretty much stopped by now. This is terribly damaging, obviously, for the Libyan economy. And now when we hear about a lot of fighting centered around oil export towns, potentially soon maybe fighting also around oil fields in the Sirte Basin, where there's a fault line between the east-west coast, well, that spells deep problems potentially for an industry which already needed a lot of investment to sort of retake what it had lost over the last 2-3 decades.
We shall continue to monitor that. Samuel Chishook, thanks so much for coming in. Well, meanwhile, foreign oil workers and other expatriates are continuing to leave Libya as the various European countries try to evacuate their nationals. Malta has become a hub for countries trying to get their citizens out. 12,000 oil workers have already been evacuated by air and sea to the Mediterranean island before they continue on to their home countries. I'll have more from Europe a little later this news hour, but right now, let's take you back to Doha and to Shuli.
Felicity, thanks very much indeed for that. Well, the fighting in Libya continues to fuel a major humanitarian crisis as migrant workers flee to neighbouring countries. Mohammed Val has been monitoring the situation in the Tunisian border town of Ras Ajdir.
This is the Ras Ajdir border crossing between Tunisia and Libya, and as you can see, it's relatively calm today, particularly in comparison to the last few days when we saw an influx of more than 10,000 people every day. Today, they are speaking here about a few hundred only. And as you can see, there are more aid workers and Tunisian security and military here than foreign workers trying to get out of Libya. We have been talking to various people trying to understand why, considering that we know that there are still hundreds of thousands of workers stranded in Libya.
There are a lot of West African, sub-Saharan African migrant workers in Libya are afraid to leave wherever they're hiding. I have spoken to Ghanaians, Nigerians, Malians, Chadians. They all say that they're afraid. They're afraid of violence. They're afraid of being beaten up by what they call local youth. We also have contractual workers. Contractual workers coming from Asian countries. Their company are probably still keeping them on contract. And then you have a lot of migrant workers who've paid a lot of money to intermediaries to come here and work in Libya. And they're probably hedging their bets for the moment, depending on how the situation evolves. And of course, there's the overall military situation on the ground, which is obviously probably not propitious to people moving towards the border areas.
According to international relief agencies, more than 1 million foreign workers are still in Libya. Whether they have decided not to leave or came under pressure from the Libyan authorities is not clear. But what is clear is that just crossing the border is not the end of the troubles for many of those foreign workers. And as you can see, we have thousands of Bangladeshis here who have been stranded for more than a week, unable to find any means of transport back home.
Well, US President Barack Obama answered his first question on Libya this week. He reiterated his position that the US is considering a range of options. For more on what's being considered, let's cross to Daljit Dhaliwal, who's in Washington, D.C. for us. Daljit.
Shuli, thanks very much. Well, the United States is weighing both its interests and its values to come up with a viable policy. The U.S. has already frozen $30 billion of Libyan assets and pushed for sanctions at the United Nations. It has also sent humanitarian aid to people fleeing the violence in Libya. The Pentagon says that aid has now reached Tunisia's border with Libya. It's being distributed by the Red Crescent. It includes 2,000 blankets, 40 rolls of plastic sheeting and nearly 10,000 containers of water. So as the United States tries to keep up with the dramatic changes in the Middle East, the so-called Obama doctrine, his foreign policy, has been evolving. In his Cairo speech in 2009, Obama called for democratic reforms, the promotion of non-violence and human rights across the region, as well as other Muslim-majority countries. He also emphasized non-interference, saying, quote, "No system of government can or should be imposed upon one nation by any other." In the past week, Obama added U.S. military resources to deliver humanitarian assistance to Libyans. While officials say that they're considering all options for Libya, including a no-fly zone, a larger military role does seem at odds with the Obama doctrine, and it's something that his Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, has cautioned against. Well, Charles Cecil was the U.S. charge d'affaires in Libya during the Bush administration. My colleague Jane Dutton asked him whether the Obama doctrine of promoting democracy while emphasizing non-intervention will work in Libya.
It's hard to see how the outcome will unfold. The Libyan people who are resisting the government don't have much experience with the use of weapons. Only those military forces that have changed sides could form any kind of practical opposition to the government. And it seems in recent days that the momentum, I'll call it, the momentum of defections of senior leaders has slowed. I think what our government needs to be thinking about is how can we restore the momentum of defections? What can we do to show the Libyan military, the security services, the police, that the tide is running against them?
How does the US government do that when there are two conflicting thought processes underway here? You've got the State Department, the Pentagon. One is saying, yes, let's use the no-fly zone, whereas the Pentagon is saying, no, you'd be crazy to do that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not simply our decision, and what we think should be done isn't going to determine the outcome. I hope it's an international community decision. But the discussion of a no-fly zone has gotten a lot of attention in recent days. I think we need to ask ourselves, what's our real objective? The President has said Gaddafi should leave. The Secretary of State has said the same. If we talk about a no-fly zone, that's really a rather passive response to what's going on. You have to have an aircraft carrier offshore, you monitor the airspace, you watch for planes in the air, and then you try to engage them.
But to get to that passive position, you first have to take some military action against Gaddafi and his regime to set up the no-fly zone.
Well, Secretary Gates said so. He said a no-fly zone starts with an attack on Libya's air defense